After revisiting Xenoblade Chronicles 1 with the release of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, video coming whenever I decide to make it, which could be never. It took a game that I already loved and made me love it even more simply because the way I played it on my second playthrough was so much different than how I played it originally. On my first run with Xenoblade Wii, it was definitely more of a story-driven playthrough. I played it going from point A to point B, eventually going off to do some grinding to take down whichever bosses halted me from progressing further, and then I continued the game. It took me roughly 80 hours to beat it, and by the end of it, it became one of my favorite games on the Wii and of that generation. But when Definitive Edition came out, I wanted to play this game the way I did Xenoblade 2, so I wanted to try and do everything this game had to offer. Explore every area, find secret locations, rebuild Colony 6, get all the Affinity Missions, fill out the Collectopedia, try doing all the side quests, you name it. 300 hours later, I now have a much bigger love and appreciation for Xenoblade Chronicles, which really doesn't happen all that often, but I can definitively say it's one of my favorite video games ever. And upon beating Definitive Edition, I thought to myself, I should really give Xenoblade X another chance. So I waited about a year and a half thinking that now was the time that Nintendo and Monolith Soft will finally bring over Xenoblade X. I mean, they're efficient enough, right? We had Xenoblade 2 in 2017, Torna, the Golden Country in 2018, Definitive Edition in 2020, so I'm sure X is on the way, it just has to be. It never came, so I brought the old Wii U out of retirement since I gave up hope for it coming to the Switch in 2021. Booted up X, deleted my save file, and gave it a whole nother playthrough. This time, really trying to get the most out of it instead of just doing story requirements and calling it a day. Really trying to get the most out of this game and see what makes it tick, like a mad scientist. And my experience with X was so much better for reasons I'll get to in this video. I originally had this game as my 7th favorite Wii U game ever, but after my second playthrough, it's a strong contender at being my favorite game on the system next to Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And if you know anything about my love for DKC:TF Tropical Freeze, you would know that it's my favorite 2D platformer of all time. So to have Xenoblade X sitting right next to it is nothing short of impressive. And in the realm of Xenoblade games, X was always the odd one out for me. I liked it, but it was never in the category of being one of my all-time greats with 1, 2, and Torna. Well, I can happily say that I really love Xenoblade Chronicles X and put it on the same level as the other games. They've all got their strengths and weaknesses, but for the most part, I would say they all balance out. Even if I still do like 2 a teensy bit more over the other games, don't hurt me. But the point is, Xenoblade X is freaking fantastic, and I'm here to gush for a few minutes as to why I think that is. And what better time than now to bring back an old series of mine called You Should Be Playing, where I talk about games that you should be playing. The last time I made a video in this series was, hold on, let me check real quick. Dear God. Also, before we get into this video, just know that this video for the most part will be spoiler free as far as the main story goes. So yeah, you can sit through this video without having to worry about that. I'm sure a lot of you guys haven't even played this game, and I want you guys to do it because, like I said a few seconds ago, Xenoblade X is freaking fantastic. Yeah. So without further delay, this is Xenoblade Chronicles X. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a game that completely shatters JRPG expectations, and not in a way that it raises the bar in almost every aspect to where this is going to be the game that other JRPGs will be compared to in the future. Nah. I mean that it's a sequel, albeit not a direct sequel to a Japanese role-playing game, made in Japan by Japanese developers, but the way this entire game is structured is so vastly different to the way most other games in this genre usually are. Everything from the gameplay to story ratio, the completely different style of music in the soundtrack, having to meet requirements to continue the story, making the meat of the game with the story, world building, and character development completely optional and skippable, and so on, is drastically different than how most other games in this genre usually tend to do it. Xenoblade Chronicles X is kinda like a Western RPG disguised as a JRPG, so it's kinda hard to fault players for being disappointed in this title. But with all that being said, that doesn't really tell us anything about this game. All that really tells us is that X isn't like other JRPGs, therefore it's bad. Which is dumb. Why not look at the things X is doing instead of judging it for not being something that it was never supposed to be in the first place? And that's where I come in, to set the record straight on this gem that is Xenoblade Chronicles X. 7 years later, but here I am. So let's talk about it. By far the biggest attraction to X is the planet that it takes place on, an alien planet called Mira. And it really does feel like an alien planet. All the locations you visit in this game feel so distinct from each other, all with amazing geographic designs, epic landscapes to explore, some with environmental effects as well as inhabitants of their own, and an amazing theme to top it all off. Even though The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild would take the crown for being the best interactive open world for me, as far as open world goes, I would have to say that Xenoblade X is my #1 favorite. It encourages discovery so much with trying to find places to install probes so that you can mine materials or money, as well as giving you the ability to fast travel, looking for objects or plants to use your field skills on, or even just wanting to try and find the highest location that you can reach to just bask in the beauty of the environments from up high, and then jumping off the highest point. And the best part is, you don't even receive fall damage in this game. Praise God. Another thing that I really like here is that the movement in this game is insane. I haven't had this much fun just moving around in a game since Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. It was kind of sad to see it go when 2 came out. No fall damage, no stamina, crazy moon jumps, and just being able to jump into small corners of a mountain to try to reach new areas was a blast. And once you get a Skell, which are these giant machines that you pilot, you then begin to take in this world, and it really makes you appreciate the geographic design that much more. One of the complaints that never really made much sense to me was about the lack of towns in this game. I've noticed that context tends to get thrown out the window when it pertains to X. The game takes place on an alien planet. This isn't Earth anymore. You're trying to make sense of this world and do the best that you can to survive. Almost everything in this game wants you dead, from the main story enemies to monsters and tyrants, aliens, and even some other Earthlings. And Mira is overran with monsters and aliens in all corners of the planet. So naturally, there wasn't going to be towns to explore. It's like being around in the Mesozoic era. Dinosaur times, people. I wouldn't blame you for not knowing. I had to look it up myself. And expecting to be able to go to towns to buy ice cream cones and whatever else you do in towns in RPGs. Even the battle theme Black Tar explains it a bit. Another thing that's really impressive is that the open world is completely seamless. You can run or fly to whatever location in the game without ever encountering a loading screen. And for how massive and detailed this world is, and for being on the Wii U, that's insane. The only area in this game that gives you a loading screen is whenever you leave the barracks in New LA, which is basically a room you'll be going to get the briefing on a mission. The creatures of Mira are interesting as well. Some of the wildlife are peaceful by nature and really couldn't care less about your existence. They've got more important things to do, like drink water out of a lake. But if provoked, they can and will attack you. One little detail that I love is if you come in contact with their foot, you'll just go flying away. I wish I could die, but I guess it makes sense, especially if you're fighting them on foot. And then you have other creatures that are always on edge. They're hunters and hostile by nature, so it's best to try to stay out of their way if you ever feel like you aren't quite ready to take them on. What I especially like is how some of the creatures will go back to their families or caves whenever nighttime comes around. So waiting till then to traverse is also a strategy to getting around Mira without fear of losing your life. It's great. You also can't just gauge your enemy's strength simply by looking at the number above their head. If, for example, there's a level 20 bunny holding a stick with its tail, and as hilarious as that sounds, there is such an enemy in the Xenoblade series, that would be a lot easier to kill than, say, a level 16 enemy that's bigger due to its size and weight. And lastly, in Mira exists a place called New Los Angeles, or New LA. This is basically the main base of operations. You'll find civilians here living their day-to-day lives like they would back on Earth. It's a very interesting concept. The civilians also have tasks for you to fulfill if you so please, whether it's gathering materials, taking down an enemy, or simply trying to put an end to a conflict happening within the city. Next up, let's talk about the characters. Xenoblade X usually gets a lot of flack for not having lovable and memorable characters, all with their own character arcs and character developments like the other 3 games in the series. But that's simply not true. While yes, Xenoblade 1 and 2 put character arcs and character development on the forefront to where you see these things unfold simply by doing the main missions, that doesn't mean that Xenoblade X doesn't have these things either. It's just that where those games are more linear stories, Xenoblade X has a much bigger emphasis on world building. This is the last of humanity. A lot of the people here are struggling with all types of problems, from losing their friends, families, and loved ones on Earth. So you'll find out by interacting with them that some of them are suffering with severe levels of depression. Some of them are thinking, what's the point of going on and contemplating suicide, amongst other things. There's also pretty deep side missions dealing with other topics like religion versus science, praise God, or how even despite all the messed up things that these characters are going through, that some people are still trying to make the best out of it. So you might find yourself trying to play matchmaker to help a friend get a girl that he likes to go out with him.
So that's her, huh? And you say her name's Dorothy? She's beautiful.
Oh, gosh. Thanks.
Not quite sure what you're taking credit for there, but okay.
Without giving too much away, a lot of the people in this game are also racist to a lot of the peaceful aliens in this game and want nothing more than to see each and every last one of them dead. So that's pretty cool. There's even a mission about a terrorist scattering exploding lobsters around the city, so you have to try to gather them all up. And I'm not joking. But guess what? I like it. It was always weird to me that 2 got so much heat for being goofy, too fan-servicey, and too anime, when both 1 and especially X had all these things as well. Anyways, X has a total of 18 playable characters that you can have as party members, having no more than a team of 4, including the silent protagonist. By the way, you don't have to play as the silent protagonist if you don't want to. They have to remain in your lineup, but you can play as one of the other party members if you so please. Something I didn't know after 200 hours of play. Yeah, I know. There's also affinity missions that you can do between characters. Sometimes they need you to have certain people in the party, a certain level and certain affinity level or something, which even further develops these characters. Heart to Hearts also make a return from the original game, and that as well gives a bit more development for these characters. But this is why I say how you play X will determine what you get out of it. With Xenoblade 1 and 2, the only thing that you really miss if you focus exclusively on the main objective and deciding not to do anything else is some Collectopedia stuff, which really doesn't matter in the end. It's just something fun to do along the way. Heart to Hearts, rebuilding Colony 6, and finding some secret locations that really don't do all that much. And with Xenoblade 2, they added the addition of affinity charts, which developed the blades a bit further. But everybody more or less gets their time to shine in the main story. That isn't really the case in Xenoblade X, but again, that doesn't mean that these things aren't in the game. And that was the first major mistake I made in my first playthrough back in 2015, 2016, was just rushing through the story and calling it a day. But if you decide to stick with it, which I highly suggest that you do, you'll more than likely come to find out that these are some legitimately well-written characters, and you'll thank yourself for sticking with it. Now let's talk about the music, because I have a lot to say about this as well. Xenoblade 1 and 2 were both great in this department, and X is no exception. Very excellent, if you will. Okay, I'm gonna stop that now. You may have heard that Xenoblade Chronicles X has a terrible soundtrack, that it tries to be Persona but it's a million times worse, that it completely ruins the overall experience and doesn't fit the tone of the game at all. And I'm not really here to argue people's opinion on music. I mean, it doesn't really get us anywhere at the end of the day. But I will say that a lot of the hate for this game's soundtrack is grossly overrated, just like most other things in this entire series. Most of the hate tends to come from Black Tar, the battle theme, and the day and night themes for New LA. Which, Okay, sure, yeah, fine. I get it. These are going to be some of the most common songs that you hear in the game just due to the purposes that they serve. You'll be in New LA and fighting a lot, so naturally, you'll be listening to them quite often. Me personally, I think Black Tar is a great song, same with the New LA night theme. My only problem with Black Tar is that it takes forever to really kick in, and then by the time that it does, the battle is usually over. But I like the songs here a lot. It was composed by Hiroyuki Sawano, most notable for his work on Kill la Kill and Attack on Titan, and he's brought his talents from those series to this game, and he did a phenomenal job here. The only negatives that I could point to in regards to the soundtrack really doesn't even have to do anything with the quality of the songs. It's more so that the audio mixing in this game is really poor at times. More often than not, the music will overpower whatever it is that the characters are saying during a cutscene. It's even worse if vocal themes are thrown into the mix, and as somebody that played without subtitles, it was pretty hard to hear what was being said at times.
Are those really your only reasons for wanting this intel?
What other reasons would there be?
Any answer I give would be idle speculation, sir.
But as for the collective quality of songs in Xenoblade X, the songs here are seriously very, very good. I cannot stress this enough. There were moments in the game where I had to stop what I was doing and just take in the environment and listen to what was being played because it was a really beautiful piece of music that really stood out to me, like the Sylvalum theme. Xenoblade 1 and 2 have very traditional RPG music, which is fantastic in their own right. To say that they excel in the soundtrack category would still be an understatement to how good I think those tracks really are. They're sci-fi/fantasy games that lean a bit more on the fantasy side, and the songs fit accordingly. Xenoblade X, on the other hand, is a whole nother story. Like, this is Xenoblade X's flying music. Is it ridiculous? Absolutely. But that's Xenoblade Chronicles X. The music of this game is so crucial to its identity that it's practically a different game without it. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2 was totally different to a lot of other songs in the platformer genre when they came out, with its hard rock, jazzy, hip-hop sounds. It was all over the place, and I love that. Also, I promise this will be the last time that I mention Sonic Adventure in this video. But like, seriously, don't touch a thing here. I'm just gonna put some of my favorite songs on the screen and definitely give it a listen if you're interested. Now, we've talked about the world, the characters, the music, and slightly, sorta, kinda, not really, somewhat talked about the story, but ultimately none of those things matter if the most important part of a video game isn't up to snuff: the gameplay. Well, I'm happy to report that Xenoblade X has very good gameplay, and as far as combat is concerned, it's arguably the best in the series thus far. Torna/two boys in the house, but I still do love X's combat nonetheless. Xenoblade X has very good gameplay all around. Everything in this game feels exceptionally well to do. Controlling your character, fighting in battle, controlling the scale on land, flying, and so on is very good. The combat is more or less what you've come to expect from Xenoblade Chronicles 1, just a bit more involved and faster paced. You'll be running around your enemy, auto-attacking, and then attacking with arts once they're available to use. But that's where the similarities end. And look, I'm not about to go over all the intricacies of the gameplay of X because this game is so vast to the point where each and every little category that I would decide to talk about could take me anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to explain it all. So naturally, the best solution for me is to not talk about it, but I will talk about the gameplay aspects really worth discussing here, or that I thought were really good. And if there is something really important and really cool here to acknowledge, it's the fact that X is the only game in the series to allow you to pick which class you want. Each class comes with their own 2 unique weapon types, a close-ranged weapon and a long-range weapon, which you can swap between the 2 at any time with just the push of a button. You can play the Assault class, which specializes in attacks and defense arts and gives you the longsword and assault rifles. The Commando class increases art damage as well as melee accuracy and gives the player access to dual blades and dual guns. One of the later unlocks in this class, which I really like, allows you to play the game like Shulk from Xenoblade 1, where positioning is crucial to get the most out of your attacks. And then lastly is the Enforcer class, which specializes in support and ranged arts. And this class allows you to use knives and ray guns. These are just the base classes though. They eventually break down and let you follow a path until you eventually land at a spot that is best suited for your style of play. Your party members, on the other hand, have one specific class, which isn't really a bad thing, because there is so many ways to customize your team by recruiting any other random NPC members of Blade that you may find while you're out there, as well as using any of the other 17 main party members. And for the most part, Elma and Lynn do their jobs very well. Xenoblade X uses what is known as the soul voice system. Essentially what this means is that one of your party members will start asking for assistance in battle, and the message will appear highlighted in a certain color. So you have to use the art color that matches with their dialogue so that you can regain some health as well as do more damage. And since this game doesn't really have a healer class, it's important to make sure that you take advantage of this whenever the chance reveals itself. Something else that really adds some strategy to the combat system is that it allows you to attack specific parts on an enemy and then break it off of them. So if an enemy, for example, has a killer attack that he uses his tail to do, instead of targeting his main body or his face, you can put all your effort into taking down his tail, even going as far as to command everybody to do the same, so that you no longer have to worry about that issue. But the enemies can also do that to you as well, and then leave your skull missing a few pieces, thus rendering you unable to use certain attacks. And speaking of skells, these are the giant mechs that you'll be able to pilot later on in the game once you get your skell license. Such an amazing moment, but you won't even get to ride one of these things until about 30 hours into the game. But then suddenly, the game opens up so much more. At first, you were limited by what your player could do, but the second the skell becomes part of the equation, all of a sudden the game just opens up even more. You're less terrified to explore certain locations because you've got more power at your disposal. You can still die pretty easily, so don't get it twisted, and you also have a much bigger leap for scaling mountains and terrain. And then the second you further upgrade your scale so that it's at its max potential and can now fly, all of a sudden the game opens up for a third time, and you truly get to explore Mira for all that it has to offer. And the best part is, it never gets old. The only problem I have in regards to the flying is ironically with the music. Even though I love the crazy as heck flying theme here, I also love the music of the world. But unfortunately, as far as I know, there's no option to turn off the music. Like, I want to be flying around listening to bangers like this. But I can't. But that's where my complaints end with the scales, because there's so much that you can do with them. As far as customization goes, you can make them to your liking. Paint job, weight class, how much fuel they use, the weapons and armors that you give them, and so on. The movement in the scales control and feel more or less how you would expect a giant robot to feel. Big hunker clunker machines when walking on land, with the added ability of being able to transform into vehicles. You can also abuse the transformation mechanic and make some crazy sharp turns as well, and that's always fun. The customization in X is undoubtedly the best in the series. Well, only one had customization, but you get my point. It's the best. It has some crazy looking armor sets for you and your party to get dressed up in, and you unlock more different types of designs the further you get into the game through the main story, as well as doing some side content and unlocking new brands of armor, usually by different life forms in this game, so armor sets are drastically different than each other. You could have standard gear, but then you could also have one that looks like it came out of a Sentai series or Monster Hunter. looks very nice. And the best part about the character customization is that you can have your character wearing the most efficient gear at the time. And if you care about uniform and everything matching like me, you're in luck, as Xenoblade X allows you to wear fashion gear, which basically allows you to keep the stats of the best gear, but lets you change the outer appearance to whatever gear you so please. So now you don't have to walk around looking like a complete idiot. Praise God. Every gameplay aspect here is done so well, from the gameplay to the customization to the exploration. If you make a game to where there's moments I just want to run to my destination instead of fast traveling, that's saying something. Xenoblade X isn't a perfect game by any means. I do actually agree with some of the criticisms. The story could have been executed a bit better. I wasn't a fan of having to meet requirements to continue the story, and that a lot of the game could have been explained better. I know we often get on games for being too hand-holdy, but dear God, there were so many things about this game that were completely unknown to me a couple years ago, and now with the knowledge that I have, makes this game so much more enjoyable for me. And I'm gonna say this one more time because I cannot stress this enough. Do not come into Xenoblade Chronicles X expecting a traditional JRPG, and also be prepared to sink a couple hundred hours into this game, because it's easily the most content-heavy JRPG I've ever played. But that's not really a bad thing, because a lot of what you're doing actually makes sense in building up the world and the characters. You can't half-ass X, you gotta be committed. 200 hours later, I don't even feel like I've scratched the surface of this game, and that's pretty cool. It would be one thing if it was tedious and I was bored out of my mind while I was playing, but that's not the case here. Hopefully it does come to the Switch one day, because it's easily the most pick up and play as well as most portable friendly of the Xenoblade games. Xenoblade X came out at a time where people were angry with Nintendo over pretty much everything they were doing business-wise and in regards to their IP. If it wasn't a specific game or a specific type of game, people really weren't trying to hear it. Whether it was Donkey Kong not being Metroid, Mario not being a quote-unquote true 3D Mario game like Mario Galaxy, but they all eventually got their flowers with the Switch, as well as sequels to what people wanted. So now people were able to accept them and look at them for what they are versus what they weren't. And I hope Xenoblade Chronicles X can do the same, because this game is truly amazing and deserves another chance.
Just make me awake.